Have you ever been handed a life you never chose because someone else made a mistake they refused to face? Claire Whitmore wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. But one man's grief and another's cowardice rewrote her entire future, sold like a solution to her father's debts. She entered a mansion, not of gold, but of shadows. No chains held her back, but the silence was louder than steel. Her husband, Everett Langston, didn't want a partner. He wanted a punishment. And she was collateral. But what happens when the woman you tried to erase refuses to disappear, when the person you underestimated the most becomes the one who sees through every layer of grief you've built around your soul? If you were Claire, would you run or stay long enough to reclaim your voice, your power, your story? This is not a love story. Not at first. It's a reckoning, a quiet rebellion, a journey through betrayal, silence, and the kind of strength that doesn't ask permission. So take a deep breath, because you're about to meet a woman who was never meant to survive, but did. And if you're ready, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because Claire's story is more than fiction. It's a question waiting to be answered. The rain had started sometime before midnight. Not a storm, not even a downpour, just a steady drizzle, like the sky itself was grieving something unspoken. Claire Whitmore sat at the small kitchen table of the home she'd lived in since she was a girl. Her fingers were curled around a chipped ceramic mug, the tea inside long gone cold. The clock above the stove ticked with quiet certainty, out of rhythm with her heartbeat. She had always known her father was drowning, not in water, but in debt. After her mother passed, something in him collapsed. At first, Claire tried to hold everything together working at the county library during the day, caring for her father in the evenings. It was a quiet life, a life of duty, but not without hope, until tonight. She had heard the voices earlier, two men, firm but polite, speaking to her father in the living room. She hadn't seen their faces. She hadn't needed to. She could read the tone, business, urgency, no warmth. Now the house was still again. Her father hadn't come to the kitchen. He hadn't said a word, but Claire knew something was ending. The creak of the hallway floorboards broke the silence. Her father stepped into the room, eyes downcast, a folder clutched in his hands. His once powerful frame was hunched now, aged not just by years, but by guilt. "Claire," he said softly, like her name was a burden in his mouth. She looked up, calm, but not numb. Claire was not the kind of woman who broke easily. "I signed something," he said. She didn't speak, only waited. He cleared his throat. "They're going to help us. Me. Pay off everything. The house. The treatment. All of it." Claire's voice, when it came, was steady. What did it cost? He couldn't meet her eyes. "Your hand," he whispered. The words didn't register at first. Not completely. "My hand," she repeated. He nodded. "Marriage. It's official now. Legal. Binding." Claire didn't drop the mug. She didn't cry. She just sat there, letting the words fall around her like cold rain. "You promised me," she said, after a long pause. "After Mom died, you said no one would ever make decisions about my life for me again. I didn't have a choice." He murmured. She stood, slowly. Her breath trembled, but her hands did not. "No," she said. "You had one. You just didn't choose me." There was nothing else to say. The next morning, a car arrived, black, silent, windows tinted like secrets. Claire stood in her worn jeans, a plain gray sweater hugging her frame. No luggage, no goodbye. Her father tried to speak as she reached the door. "I did it to save us," he said. She didn't turn back. There is no us anymore. Then she stepped into the car and let the door close behind her with a quiet, final click. The ride was long, forests blurred by, mountains loomed in the distance. Claire said nothing. She didn't ask where they were going. It didn't matter. In her chest, a storm had begun, and far ahead, in a mansion of stone and silence, Everett Langston waited for a woman he had never met but had bought. Not for love, not for companionship, but for something darker. And he didn't yet know that the woman walking toward him would be the one thing he could never control. The car turned off the main highway sometime after dusk. The road narrowed into a tree-lined path, the tires crunching softly over gravel as mist began to rise between the pines. There were no signs, no lights, no markers, just forest and shadows. Claire's eyes scanned the trees, but her mind was elsewhere. She had not spoken a word since leaving her father's home. Silence, she had found, had a way of protecting things. It let pain settle without spilling. The vehicle stopped at an ornate iron gate, so tall it seemed to scratch the sky. Beyond it, barely visible through the fog, loomed a mansion of gray stone and black glass, its edges sharp and severe like something carved out of grief. The driver stepped out and opened her door with clinical precision. No eye contact, no words. Claire stepped into the cold air. She didn't shiver. She simply stood, back straight, gaze forward. Whatever waited inside, she would meet it standing tall. Two figures approached from the front steps, one a butler in a tailored suit, the other taller, broader, wearing a charcoal coat that blended into the evening. The second man stopped at the base of the stairs and looked at her. This, she knew, was Everett Langston. He didn't smile, didn't reach out, didn't speak. His face was unreadable, but not empty. His eyes, pale gray and piercing, studied her the way a collector studies a rare artifact, curious, distant, almost clinical, as if she were something acquired, not someone arrived. Claire met his gaze and didn't blink. He gestured with one hand toward the front door. "Inside," he said. Just that. The butler took her bag small, weightless. She had brought almost nothing with her, not because she was unprepared, but because she wanted no part of this place to think it had ownership over anything she truly valued. As they entered the mansion, the door closed behind her with a sound that echoed like a verdict. The entry hall was vast and cold, the kind of beauty that demanded silence. Marble floors, dark wood panels, a chandelier of crystal that looked like it hadn't sparkled in years. "Your room is upstairs," Everett said without looking at her. "Second door on the right. You'll find everything you need." Claire nodded once, "And if I need something else?" He turned his eyes to her again. "You'll learn not to." The air between them thickened. "You don't talk much, do you?" she said. Calm as ever, "Not unless there's something worth saying." He replied, "A beat passed." Then she smiled, "Just a ghost of one." "Well, at least we have that in common." For the first time, something flickered across his expression. Not amusement, not irritation, just pause, as if she'd said something he wasn't expecting to hear. The butler returned, gesturing for her to follow him up the stairs. Claire hesitated a second longer, letting the silence hold. Then she turned her back on Everett Langston and walked up the staircase with quiet grace, like a woman entering not a home, but a battlefield. The room was elegant, immaculate, soulless. Cream-colored walls, a heavy wooden bed, untouched linens, a view of a garden walled on all sides, a cage dressed as a sanctuary. Claire stood at the window for a long time, arms crossed. From here, nothing felt real. The past 24 hours, the betrayal, the car, the house seemed like echoes of someone else's life. And yet, there was no mistaking it. She was here. And he, Everett Langston, was not a man seeking a wife. He was seeking a ghost to haunt. What he didn't know, what he couldn't yet see, was that Claire Whitmore was not made to disappear. She was made to endure. And in silence, she whispered to her own reflection in the darkened glass, "You may own the contract, but not the story." Morning came slowly to the Langston estate. The sun filtered through a haze of mist, casting long gray shadows across the stone courtyard. Birds sang somewhere beyond the tall hedges, but their song felt distant, like a memory trying to reach through glass. Claire woke without an alarm. Her body, used to early hours, followed its rhythm even in unfamiliar places. She sat up in the bed that wasn't hers, in a room that didn't welcome her. The sheets were heavy, crisp, expensive, and cold. She dressed simply soft jeans, a white cotton blouse, and tied her hair back. Her reflection in the tall mirror was pale but composed. Not broken, not bitter, just watching. The door creaked when she opened it. The hallway outside was silent, lined with paintings of faces long dead and furniture too elegant to touch. The house didn't speak, it whispered. Every polished surface, every shadowed corner seemed designed to say you don't belong here. Downstairs, the dining room awaited her like a courtroom. The table could seat 20, but only 2 places were set, one at each end. Silverware gleamed. The chandelier above flickered faintly in the morning light. Everett was already seated. He didn't look up when she entered, just gestured to the chair across the vast wooden table. Claire walked calmly to her seat. She didn't speak, didn't rush. She pulled out the chair, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap like someone attending a negotiation. Not a meal. Toast, fruit, eggs. None of it touched. Everett sipped his coffee in silence. Finally, he spoke. "You should eat." Claire raised an eyebrow slightly. "Because you say so." He looked at her. Still no warmth. Still no spark. "Because it's important to keep up appearances." She nodded slowly. "And what appearances are we keeping up?" "Exactly." He didn't answer. Just set his cup down with a gentle click. Claire leaned back. "If this is supposed to be a marriage, you might consider speaking to your wife." "You're not my wife," he said, voice even. "You're a name on paper, a transaction, nothing more." A pause. Then Claire smiled faintly, as if the insult didn't sting. "And yet here I sit, in your house, drinking your silence like it's morning tea." For the first time, Everett's expression shifted not with emotion, but with caution. She had said something he hadn't expected. Again. After breakfast, she wandered the house. The estate was sprawling, with wings and corridors like veins branching from a heart that hadn't beat in years. Rooms were locked, curtains were drawn. The few staff she encountered nodded politely, but avoided eye contact. Claire studied everything, not out of curiosity, but survival. She noted doors that squeaked, windows that opened, footsteps that echoed. The rhythm of this place wasn't life, it was control. In the afternoon, she found a library. It wasn't grand, like the ones in magazines. It was personal, lined with dark shelves, old volumes, a leather armchair near the fireplace. Dust coated the corners. But someone had used the room recently. She stepped in and ran her fingers along the spines, names she recognized, some she didn't. She pulled a novel from the shelf, sat down, and opened it, but didn't read. Her mind was far from the pages. She thought about the word wife, how strange it sounded in this context. Not sacred, not tender, just cold and sharp like the edge of a blade. And she thought about Everett, how he moved like someone carrying a wound too old to bleed, but too deep to forget. She didn't fear him, but she didn't trust him either. That night, the halls were darker, the lights dimmed early. Claire sat by the window in her room, staring at the garden beyond the wall. A prison doesn't need bars if it's beautiful enough. And she understood now, this place was designed not to punish, but to erase. But she wouldn't vanish. She wouldn't become invisible. She had survived silence before. She would survive this too. It was in the small things, the way he never used her name, the way he left a room just before she entered, the way the staff seemed trained to pretend she was invisible. But Claire was used to being unseen. What she wasn't used to was being deliberately dismissed. On the 4th morning, she came down to breakfast wearing a soft green dress. Not formal, not defiant, just her. The sunlight cut through the dining room windows, casting gold across the polished table. Her chair was already pulled out. Everett sat at the other end, as always, a paper in hand, coffee beside him. His tie was perfectly knotted, suit pressed to an edge. His world had no room for messes or feelings. Claire sat without a word. After a while, she spoke. "Do you ever get tired of pretending this is normal?" He didn't look up. "Define normal." She leaned slightly forward, hands clasped. 2 people eating in silence every day, like ghosts who never admit they're haunting each other. A beat passed. Then Everett said, I don't consider this a conversation. Claire nodded, more to herself than him. No, I didn't think you did. She stood and left the room. Later that day, she found herself in the solarium, a place of filtered light and quiet air. Plants lined the windowsills, cared for by someone other than him. A single worn armchair sat in the corner, and she made it hers. She began to write. Not a journal too sentimental for her taste, but fragments, observations, truths that had no place in spoken words. You can't punish a stranger for the wound someone else left behind. But I think you're trying to. Your house is made of silence, and I won't be another brick in its walls. That evening, dinner was served late. Claire wore a pale ivory blouse, hair loose, lips soft with color, not to impress, to remind herself that she hadn't disappeared. Everett entered and paused briefly when he saw her. Just enough of a flicker for her to catch it, then it vanished. He sat. Halfway through the meal, he spoke. You're trying to provoke me. Claire sipped her water. Am I succeeding? He narrowed his eyes. Why? Because silence, she said gently, is a form of cruelty, and I don't participate in cruelty. A flicker of tension moved across his jaw. You think this is cruelty? She set her fork down, very deliberately. I think keeping someone in a house, refusing to speak, pretending they're not human, that's not silence. Everett, that's control dressed in quiet. He pushed his chair back and stood slowly, measured. You're here because of your father. Claire didn't flinch. I'm here because you needed someone to blame. He froze, and there it was, a crack. Barely visible, but real. She stood too, the air between them charged like a storm about to break. Tell yourself whatever you need, she said. But if you're looking for submission, you chose the wrong woman. She left the room, footsteps echoing softly, like a song written in defiance. That night, Claire sat on the balcony outside her room. The sky was quiet. A blanket of stars spread thin over the trees. Her breath clouded the air, and she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. She wasn't angry. She was waiting, not for kindness, not even for respect, but for acknowledgement, to be seen, to be named. Because even in the most silent prison, the smallest voice can echo loud enough to break stone. The western wing of the Langston estate was always cold, not from weather, but memory. Even the staff avoided it. No footsteps echoed there, no doors opened. The hallway at the far end remained still, like a breath held too long. Claire noticed the pattern early. The butler never dusted past a certain door. The maid's eyes darted away when she passed by it. The key to understanding Everett, she realized, was not in what he said, but in what he kept locked. One morning, while walking the inner corridor alone, she tested the door handle. It was old, brass, with delicate engraving worn down by time. Locked. She didn't expect otherwise, but now she knew where the silence lived. That evening, after Everett had retreated to his study, Claire walked the halls again. Her steps were soft, measured, listening more than moving. The house had begun to teach her its secrets not through words, but through creaks, drafts, and the subtle heartbeat of absence. She found the butler's closet off the kitchen, filled with linens, polish, spare uniforms, and keys. She hesitated. Then she took the one marked W East, not out of defiance, out of need. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The door opened with a whisper of air, as though the room had been holding its breath for years. Inside, darkness, dust, and silence so thick it pressed against her skin. She found a lamp, flicked it on. What the light revealed was not what she expected. It wasn't an office, not a vault, but a room of memory. Photographs lined the mantel, framed letters, a vase still holding the dry, ghostly remnants of once fresh flowers. On one wall hung a portrait, a young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, smiling beneath a summer sky, blonde hair, eyes full of mischief. Claire stepped closer. On the frame's corner, carved with almost painful precision, Abigail. The name meant nothing to her, but the face, it meant everything to him. There was something sacred about the way the room had been preserved. No dust on the picture frames. The bed neatly made, as if someone came in here often, but never stayed long. Claire sat on the edge of the bed. A sudden heaviness settled in her chest. This wasn't a room of grief. It was a shrine. She didn't hear Everett approach, didn't know he'd followed her until she saw his shadow stretch across the doorway. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand to know why she was there. He just stood, fists clenched at his sides, the muscles in his jaw locked tight. Claire stood slowly. "I didn't break anything," she said quietly. "I just opened a door you already left ajar." He looked at her, then not like the woman he'd forced into his house, but like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, holding the truth he'd buried beneath a lifetime of silence. "You shouldn't be here," he said. But the words didn't have bite. They were hollow, hurt. Claire nodded. Neither should she. "But you keep her here anyway." The silence between them trembled, and then, without another word, Everett turned and walked away. That night, Claire lay awake. She didn't think about escape. She didn't think about blame. She thought about the portrait, the softness in the eyes, the care in the room, the weight Everett carried that shaped every wall in this house. And for the first time, she didn't see a tyrant. She saw a man carrying a wound so deep, he built a kingdom to contain it. But what he didn't realize was, wounds that are never touched, never heal. And she had just touched his. The rain returned the next morning, though not in torrents, but soft and steady, like the house itself was grieving again. Claire stood in the library, the one place that allowed her to breathe. She'd begun spending more time there, claiming a corner near the tall window, a chair, a small table, and silence that didn't demand obedience. But her thoughts weren't in the books. They were down the hall, in the locked room, in the name carved into that frame. Abigail. She needed answers, not to accuse, but to understand. Behind one of the lower shelves, she found a stack of leather-bound albums, old, worn. One of them didn't have a title, just a faint scratch where gold lettering had once been. She opened it slowly. Photographs. Dozens of them. Abigail's face appeared again and again, captured in moments too joyful to be staged. Summer dresses, windswept hair, picnics by the lake, and always beside her Everett. Younger, softer. Not the man who sat stone-faced across from Claire at breakfast. A man who once laughed without armor. In one photo, he was holding Abigail's hand as she stood on the hood of an old truck, smiling like she had the whole world ahead of her. Claire turned the pages slowly, until she reached the final one, tucked behind the back cover, yellowed and folded, a newspaper clipping. Fatal collision. Claims life of diplomat's daughter. Claire's breath caught. The article was brief, almost clinical in its description. A car accident at an intersection. The vehicle struck by a driver under the influence. Victim Abigail Miller, age 26, declared dead at the scene. The driver, Eugene Whitmore. Claire's heart dropped into silence. Her hands trembled as she held the paper. It wasn't just that Abigail had died. It was that her father had been the one to kill her. She sat there for a long time, unable to move. The house around her felt different now, less distant, more loaded. The walls weren't just cold. They were built out of mourning. That evening, she found Everett outside, standing beneath the overhang of the back veranda, watching the rain. She didn't announce herself, just stood nearby. He didn't turn. "Finally," she said. "I know." His shoulders tensed. "You went through her things. I found what you've been carrying," she said softly, "and I think it's been carrying you too." Everett turned to face her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were full of something raw. "She was my beginning," he said, voice low, "and my undoing." Claire stepped closer, not out of sympathy but clarity. "My father," she whispered, "never spoke of it." "I didn't know. You didn't need to," he said. "Your name was enough." He looked away again, jaw tight. "I didn't marry you for love," he added. "I married you because I wanted your father to feel what I felt." Claire's voice didn't rise. She didn't shout. or cry. She simply said, "So you caged a daughter to avenge the death of another." The rain grew heavier. Everett didn't respond. Claire walked forward until she stood beside him, inches away, both of them soaked in the silence of a truth too heavy for one person to carry alone. She didn't reach for his hand, but her voice was steady. "You buried her in this house, and then you buried yourself." He looked at her, truly looked perhaps for the first time, and what he saw wasn't guilt. It was strength, not forgiveness, but understanding. That night, Claire returned to her room. She placed the article in the drawer and sat by the window, watching the storm move over the estate. She no longer felt like a stranger here. She felt like someone who had been thrown into a war she didn't start, but would finish, not with weapons, but with truth. The storm had lingered through the night, swelling into something more than weather. Thunder rolled in the distance, but the true storm was inside the walls of the Langston estate, between two people standing on opposite ends of a wound that had never healed. Claire had spent the day walking the outer edges of the garden, tracing its walls like the inside of a maze. Her boots pressed softly into damp earth. The trees bent in the wind, and the sky hung low with gray weight. She was no longer afraid. What she carried now was heavier than fear. It was knowing. She found Everett in the west drawing room, a space rarely used. Firelight flickered against the high ceilings, casting shadows that moved like ghosts behind him. He stood near the fireplace, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. He didn't turn when she entered, but he didn't ask her to leave either. Claire stood in the doorway for a long moment, then stepped inside. "You used me," she said. Everett didn't move. "Yes." Claire walked closer. "You made me a punishment." Still no defense. "I was the knife," she added, voice trembling but steady. "You held it to my throat and called it justice." That made him turn. His face was tired, like someone who hadn't slept in years, even while lying in bed each night. He didn't offer excuses, but there was fury in his silence, directed more at himself than her. "I didn't know what else to do with the pain," he finally said. Claire stared at him. "So, you fed it." His hand tightened around the glass. "Abigail was my life. One moment, one man. And it was gone. And the world moved on." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't blink. "Except you didn't." "No," he admitted. "I stayed in the ashes." They stood in the quiet. The fire crackled, somewhere upstairs. A window shuddered in the wind. Claire stepped even closer. She didn't deserve to die. "I won't ever argue that," she said, "but I didn't kill her, and you didn't have the courage to face the one who did, so you found someone easier to hurt." The truth landed between them like a match. Everett exhaled sharply. His voice came rough and low. "You speak like someone who's never lost everything." She didn't flinch. "My mother died when I was 15, Claire said. "She held my hand until the last breath and made me promise to never let anyone silence me again. My father, he didn't die, but he left me the day he sold me to you. Don't tell me I don't know loss." Something in his face cracked, not enough to break, but enough to flicker. He lowered the glass. "I see you now," he said quietly. Claire's voice came softer. "No, you're just starting to..." Lightning flashed beyond the windows. The thunder that followed was immediate, loud, close, almost violent. The storm had arrived fully now, rattling the foundations of the estate, but neither of them moved. In the firelight, with words as their only weapon, they stood like two survivors on a battlefield neither had chosen. "You can keep building rooms full of memory," Claire whispered, "but it won't bring her back." His jaw clenched. "It's the only thing I had left. Not anymore." She reached for the door, hand on the knob. Everett's voice stopped her. "What do I do with this?" he asked. "This truth." She turned her head, but not fully. "You don't use it to hurt," she said. "You let it hurt you, and then, maybe, if you're brave enough, you learn to live again." Then she left him standing in the room built of shadows and fire, his silence louder than any storm outside. That night, Claire didn't cry. She didn't need to. She had said what needed to be said. No more. No less. And in doing so, she had taken something back. Not control, not vengeance, but herself. The morning after the storm, the estate was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that settles not after peace, but after tension, like a house holding its breath, unsure if the roof had cracked under the weight of thunder or if everything had merely shifted. Claire rose early. She dressed in dark jeans and a jacket that hugged close to her frame. Her steps were light, but not hurried. She wasn't afraid of being caught. She just didn't want to ask permission. She had spent weeks mapping the estate in silence, studying the shifts in staff rotations, the gates that stayed locked only until late evening, the trail near the rear garden that bent sharply toward the trees. No one ever went there. And now, as the fog clung to the ground and dew painted the marble steps, she walked past the east corridor and into the utility hall. She slipped outside unnoticed. The cold bit her skin, but it was the kind of sting that reminded her she was alive. Every step across the gravel path was deliberate, not desperate. She didn't want to run. She just wanted to remember what it felt like to move without being watched. She reached the edge of the property, where the iron fencing met a patch of stone that time had weathered. One foothold, then another. But before her fingers could reach the top rail, a voice cut through the fog behind her. Going somewhere. Claire froze. She turned, slowly. Everett stood several feet away, arms crossed, coat unbuttoned, no guards, no weapon, just him. She didn't lie. I needed to know if I still could. He tilted his head. Leave. She nodded. Choose. A long pause. You can, he said. You always could. Claire stepped down from the fence, eyes steady on his. You say that now. His voice was calm, but tight. Do you think I'd stop you? I think you already did. Another beat of silence. Then, you think this place is a prison, Everett said. But I didn't lock you in. No, Claire replied. You just made the outside disappear. She walked past him slowly, her boots pressing into the soft mud, her breath rising like smoke in the cold morning air. He didn't follow, not yet. Back in her room. She sat at the edge of the bed, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of choices. She could leave, tonight, tomorrow, maybe the next day. But she didn't want to run. She wanted something harder. She wanted to face what she now understood. This place had never been about walls. It had been about what lived behind them, and the person she was now. She didn't hide from that. That evening, Claire came to dinner dressed simply, but deliberately, hair tied back, eyes clear. Everett was already seated. He didn't speak as she entered. She sat across from him, reached for her fork, and began to eat slowly, carefully, as if she were reclaiming each gesture as her own. Midway through the meal, Everett looked at her and said, You didn't go... Claire set down her glass. No. Why? She paused, then answered with something between mercy and challenge. Because if I leave whole, not as someone you broke. His eyes lingered on her face. There was no smugness in his expression, no cold calculation, only uncertainty, like a man finally realizing he'd never known how to win, only how not to lose. That night, Claire walked the halls barefoot, her fingers brushing the stone walls. She wasn't sneaking, she wasn't searching, she was claiming, one quiet step at a time, because freedom isn't always the act of leaving. Sometimes it's staying on your own terms. The day passed like an echo. Claire stayed in the library, her chair by the window her only refuge. She didn't open a book. She simply watched the light shift through the glass. The warmth of morning turned to afternoon gold, then slid into shadow. But inside her, everything was still but not silent. Something had changed in the air between her and Everett. Not peace, not yet, but pressure, waiting to collapse. And that evening, it did. She found him in his office. The door was half open. He was standing by the fireplace, staring into nothing, a stack of untouched documents on the desk behind him. She stepped inside and closed the door with a soft click. He turned. Claire didn't hesitate. "No more half-truths," she said. "No more locked rooms. I need you to say it." Everett didn't pretend to misunderstand. He ran a hand through his hair. For once, he looked tired, not polished, not composed, just a man coming undone. "I married you to punish your father," he said flatly. "That's it." Claire didn't move. "I didn't know your face. I didn't ask your name. All I wanted was to see Eugene Whitmore fall apart the way I did." She nodded slowly. "And you thought using his daughter like a bargaining chip would do that?" "Yes." "Did it?" Everett swallowed hard. "No," he said quietly. Silence followed, heavy, not empty. Claire took a breath, voice trembling. "You turned me into a reminder of everything you hated. You looked at me and saw the car that hit her." His eyes closed for a long moment. "I know," he said, "and I was wrong." Claire stepped closer. "No, Everett, you weren't just wrong. You were cruel." She paused, her voice steadied, but her fingers curled slightly at her sides. "I lost my life the moment I stepped into that car. But unlike you, I didn't build a fortress out of my pain. I lived inside it, every day. I made it to morning. You made it into stone." Everett looked up, and this time, his eyes didn't harden. They broke. "I thought if I could make someone else feel what I felt, I wouldn't be alone in it." "You were never alone," Claire whispered. "You just refused to be seen." He sat down then, shoulders sinking, as if the truth had finally weighed too much to carry. "I see you now," he said. Claire shook her head gently. "No, Everett, not yet. You see the damage, but not the woman who survived it." Her voice softened. "You see me as the end of your past. But I'm not. I'm the beginning of your choice." They didn't speak for a long while. The fire hissed quietly behind them. Claire stood near the desk, watching him, this man who once orchestrated her captivity, now laid bare by the truth he couldn't carry alone. "I don't need an apology," she said. "I need a reason to believe this wasn't the end of me." Everett looked at her, and what flickered there wasn't pride, wasn't pain. It was something simpler. Need. "I can't change how this started," he said, voice low, "but I want to change what it becomes." Claire nodded once, then turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped, her hand on the frame. She said, "If you want something real, Everett, you'll have to earn every word, every inch, every breath." He didn't respond, but when the door closed behind her, he didn't return to the fireplace. He just sat there, still, unarmed. And finally, beginning. The Langston estate changed slowly, not in the way seasons do, or how light shifts across a room. It changed in the way grief loosens its grip, not all at once, but moment by moment, until one day, something no longer hurts the way it used to. It started with the curtains. One morning, Claire woke to find the heavy, dark velvet drapes in the dining room replaced with pale linen. The sunlight poured in like it had been waiting for permission. She said nothing, but she noticed. The next day, the housekeeper brought fresh flowers into the library, white camellias. Claire watched her arrange them, unsure whether the act was Everett's idea or someone else's. Still, they were there. A sign. The house was no longer a tomb. Something had shifted, and Everett. He began to appear, not as a figure at the far end of a dining table, but in quieter spaces, the garden, the hallway. Once, even in the kitchen, awkwardly trying to make tea, he never drank. Claire caught him mid-pour, standing stiffly over the kettle. He glanced up, clearly out of his element. "I didn't know if you preferred lemon or milk," he said, without looking at her. She stepped forward, calm. "Neither." He paused. "Then I've ruined both." She almost smiled. Almost. Later that week, she found him in the greenhouse, sleeves rolled up, hands clumsily repotting a wilting plant. "You'll kill it like that," she said gently. He looked up, dirt on his wrist, humility in his eyes. Then teach me. That stopped her, because it wasn't just a request, it was a surrender, a small one, but real. Claire crossed the room, knelt beside him, and showed him how to loosen the roots before replanting. He watched her hands, not just the plant, and when she was done, he said, "You have a patience I wasn't prepared for." She met his gaze. "That's because you never expected me to stay." But Claire didn't stay because of him. She stayed because of who she was becoming. And something in her shifted too, not forgiveness, not even affection, but possibility. She no longer moved through the house like a ghost. She read again, wrote again. She even opened the windows of her room and let the wind in. And Everett. He noticed. One evening, Claire sat in the solarium, journal in hand, bare feet tucked beneath her. Everett stood at the threshold, silent, watching. "I haven't asked," he said at last, "what you want from this." Claire closed the notebook. "I'm still deciding." His shoulders straightened, and for once, there was no defense in his posture. "Whatever it is," he said slowly, "I want to earn it." She didn't respond right away. Then she said, "That's not something you say once. That's something you prove every day." He nodded and left her alone, not as an escape, but in respect. That night, Claire sat at her window, staring into the dark trees beyond the garden. She didn't know what this was yet. It wasn't trust. It wasn't love, but it was no longer war. And sometimes, a flicker of change is enough to light a path forward. Claire hadn't felt like herself for days. It wasn't illness, not exactly. Just a fatigue that wrapped around her bones. A faint dizziness when she stood too quickly. A shift in appetite. A heaviness that made her chest feel like it was carrying something too new to be named. She tried to ignore it at first, drank more water, slept earlier, took long walks in the garden, breathing deeply beneath the changing leaves, but the feeling didn't leave. And one morning, as the sun crept across the bedroom floor and touched her bare toes, the truth arrived in a whisper her body could no longer keep. She was late, very late. She left the estate on foot. There was a small clinic in town 2 miles past the iron gates, tucked beside a florist and a diner that still sold coffee in paper cups with handwritten names. She didn't give hers, the nurse didn't ask. And when Claire sat in the cold, white room with a plastic test strip trembling in her palm, the silence told her everything before the result did. Positive. She was pregnant. The walk back felt longer. Her thoughts didn't rush. They unfolded, slowly, like petals in the dark, not from panic, from clarity. She found Everett in the garden, kneeling beside the rose beds. His sleeves were rolled, hands dirty again, face streaked with sun. He looked up when he saw her stood, wiped his palms on a towel. "You walked," he said, surprised. Claire nodded. Then, simply, "I need to tell you something." Everett froze. In her voice, there was no trembling, no demand, just truth. "I'm pregnant." Silence. Not stunned. Hollow. His eyes searched hers, not for accusation, not for confirmation, just understanding. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes." She watched his breath catch. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came. She waited. "Then I didn't plan this," he said. Claire's voice was quiet. "Neither did I." He took a step forward. "Are you okay?" And there it was, a question she hadn't expected. Not, "What are we going to do?" Not, "How could this happen?" But, "Are you okay?" That was the first moment she let herself exhale. "I don't know," she said honestly. They sat on the edge of the stone bench by the rose garden, side by side, not touching. "I don't know what kind of father I would be," Everett murmured. Claire turned to him. "Neither do I." He let out a low, pained laugh. "I can barely keep a plant alive." She managed a soft smile. "Then I guess we both have something to learn." That night, Claire stood in front of the mirror in her room. She placed a hand over her stomach, flat, silent, and still too early for anyone else to know. But she knew. And suddenly, She wasn't just one life, she was two, and that changed everything. Not because it fixed the past, but because it gave her a reason to shape the future. Autumn deepened. The trees outside the Langston estate caught fire in silence, crimson, gold, and amber cascading down like pieces of something finally letting go. Claire watched the leaves fall each morning, hand resting lightly against her stomach, now just beginning to change. Her body had begun to whisper what her mind had long understood. Life was no longer something that happened to her. It was something she chose daily, deliberately. Everett had changed. Not overnight, not loudly, but in ways that mattered. He didn't speak of redemption. He didn't apologize again and again. He didn't promise miracles. Instead, he did the dishes. He watered the plants without being reminded. He learned how Claire liked her tea, no lemon, no milk. He read the books she left out on the table. And once, quietly, she found him sitting on the floor of Abigail's old room, holding a photo, whispering a goodbye. That was the day he let her go. Not Claire, but Abigail. And in doing so, for the first time, he let himself come back. They didn't rush into love. There were no grand declarations, no sudden embraces. But there were moments. Claire humming while organizing books in the library. Everett fixing the broken hinge on her dresser without being asked. The two of them sitting by the fireplace, not talking, not needing to. And sometimes, silence could say, "I see you now." When winter came, Claire stood on the porch of the estate, wrapped in a soft gray coat, snowflakes melting on her gloves. Everett joined her without a word. She spoke first. "I still don't forgive you." "I know," he said. "I don't know if I ever will." He nodded. "That's not mine to ask." She turned to him. "But I believe you mean what you're doing now." Everett met her eyes. "I do." And then, in the stillness between them, "I'm not here because of what you did to me," Claire said. "I'm here because of what I'm doing with it." He didn't speak. She didn't need him to. Months passed. The nursery slowly took shape, not as a project, but as a shared act of hope. Soft, blue-gray walls, a rocking chair, a mobile Claire picked out with her fingertips, tracing every wooden star. She began to write again, not in fragments, but stories, of women who broke and bled and rebuilt. Stories of men who failed but stayed long enough to grow. Stories that didn't end with perfect, but with peace. The night their son was born was quiet. No drama, no emergency, just hours of labor beneath warm lights. Claire's fingers clutching Everett's hand as he whispered words not of control, but of presence. They named him Elliot, after no one, because this was a new beginning. In the months that followed, Claire would still rise early. She'd watch the trees outside the nursery window, the world soft and blue before sunrise. Elliot's breath would rise and fall gently against her chest, and she'd whisper, "You weren't born from love. You were born from truth. And that's why you'll never be a weapon, or a debt, or a wound. You are a beginning." She and Everett never went back to what people called normal, but they built something better, something flawed, honest, quiet, a life made not of forgetting, but of choosing, over and over again. Because redemption never arrives wrapped in ribbons. It comes with dirt under your nails, tears in your eyes, and the will to stay even when you've been told you shouldn't. And for Claire Whitmore, that was enough. Sometimes, the greatest love stories don't begin with love. They begin with pain, with silence, with the impossible task of learning how to see another person beyond a name, a past, or a wound. Claire's journey wasn't just about surviving injustice. It was about reclaiming the power to choose who she would become, even when the world tried to write her story for her. And Everett. He was proof that even those who've lost their way can find the courage to change. But beneath every act of redemption, this story reminds us of something deeper, that no one should be used as a symbol, that love is not a transaction, and that behind every quiet woman's gaze may be a voice the world once refused to hear. Let this story be a soft rebellion against invisible cruelty, against emotional captivity, and against every form of silent discrimination that still lingers in the spaces we refuse to see. And if it moved you, even just a little, share it. Talk about it. Let it ripple. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Because the stories we feel the deepest are the ones we're meant to pass on. We'll see you in the next one.